friends, it's Lisa and welcome to a new video. So I am super excited about today's video because I'm going to be comparing books that I've read to Taylor Swift songs. When I am posting this video, it is actually Taylor Swift's birthday. We love to see it. I love Taylor Swift so much, so I wanted to do something to celebrate her birthday on this channel because any opportunity that I find to talk about Taylor Swift, I will take. So I thought, why not talk about books that I have read and compare them to Taylor Swift songs? I thought that that would be a fun way to recommend some books while also talking about Taylor Swift. Now, I'm not going to say that this is going to be technically a recommendations video. It's more so just I found books that kind of reminded me of Taylor Swift songs, whether that's the characters in the book, the relationships in the book, the plot, the themes, anything like that that reminded me of Taylor Swift songs. That's kind of what I based it off of. So I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a recommendations video, but I do love all of these books, so if you have not read them, I definitely would recommend. But I'm not saying I'm giving the most groundbreaking, recommendations. I just wanted to compare books to Taylor Swift songs, so that is what I'm doing. But yeah, I think that that is everything. I have 13 books to share with you guys. Of course, I had to go with 13, so let's just get into it. So the first book that actually was kind of the inspiration for this entire video, I think I was reading this book and this song came up on shuffle kind of around the time that I was reading this book, and I was like, there's kind of some lines that correlate and remind me of each other. So the first song I want to talk about is Dancing with Her Hands Tied from her Reputation album, and the book I'm going to be comparing it to is Cryer's War by Nina Varela. But basically this book follows two main characters. One is Cryer, and she is kind of royalty within this world, but the actual royalty in this world are automatons, so they're not like real people, they were built. We also do have humans in this world where they're kind of at war with the automatons and trying to rebel against them. And our main character, Ayla, is kind of bitter towards the automatons and the king of kind of where she lives because he was actually the one who ordered her family to be killed. So she kind of wants vengeance and revenge and has this plan to get into the castle and kill Cryer. But of course, none of that ever goes to plan, and Ayla and Cryer actually end up becoming close through Ayla trying to get into the castle. They end up becoming closer and end up kind of developing feelings for one another. And the reason I'm comparing this to Dancing with Her Hands Tied is I just feel like the overall message of the song, how they have to kind of keep this relationship a secret, and also just them kind of struggling to understand their feelings in the first place, I think really like compares to Dancing with Her Hands Tied. Also, there is a specific line in Dancing with Her Hands Tied about a locket, and it's just kind of one of those weird things where I don't think it means the same, but there is a character, Ayla, who wears a locket in this book, and it actually is a very big part of the plot. So it's just kind of weird that she mentions a locket and there is a locket that is a big part of this story. But I think just overall how they have to kind of keep their relationship a secret, and how Taylor Swift says in the song, I had a bad feeling. I think both of them kind of had this bad feeling that it wasn't going to work and what was going on between them was not going to last. And I just think overall Dancing with Her Hands Tied represents this book really well. So if you like that song, read this book. Plus this book is really good, so you should just read it in general. So the next song I want to base a book off of is The Last Great American Dynasty, which is off of Folklore. Now, listening to basically the entire Folklore album, I am convinced that Taylor Swift has read this book. But if she hasn't, I basically am going to recommend it to her if I ever meet Taylor Swift, which probably isn't going to happen. But if I do meet Taylor Swift, I'm going to say, hello, thank you for making me so happy, and will you please read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a super popular book here on BookTube, but in case you haven't heard of it, basically we're following a woman named Evelyn Hugo who has kind of risen and was a huge movie star and just a Hollywood star through the 50s to the 90s, I think. Think like Marilyn Monroe. That's how big Evelyn Hugo was in her prime. But now we are following this story years later when Evelyn Hugo is kind of an older woman. But then we have a character named Monique who is a magazine reporter, and she thinks Evelyn Hugo is reaching out to her to write a story based off of a certain charity that Evelyn Hugo is donating dresses to. But in actuality, Evelyn Hugo wants Monique to write her life story and create a book and publish a book based off of her life story. So this book is kind of bouncing back and forth between the present and the past, and we're kind of getting the story of Evelyn Hugo, why she had 7 husbands, and also kind of flashing forward to Monique and the current timeline. But I think the reason that this reminds me so much of The Last Great American Dynasty is basically how that book is kind of following this woman who is super popular and, just kind of does what she wants, and people might complain about her and people kind of start rumors about her. And I think just Rebecca, who who is the person Taylor Swift wrote that song about, kind of reminds me of Evelyn, or just kind of the way Taylor tells Rebecca's story. I think a lot of the lines kind of represent Evelyn and could be, you know, a similar sort of situation. I basically just think like the chorus of The Last Great American Dynasty could also describe Evelyn. I just feel like a lot of what Taylor was trying to tell about Rebecca's story in that song really reflects Evelyn as well. So I definitely would recommend picking this up if you haven't, especially if you like kind of the storytelling in The Last Great American Dynasty. Definitely would recommend. The next song I want to compare to a book is I Think He Knows, which is off of the Lover album. And again, kind of just like the vibe of this song, basically all of the lyrics, the whole song kind of reminds me of this book, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. So this book takes place in an alternative political climate in 2016, and our main character, Alex, is the son of the first female president of the United States, and we're kind of following her re-election, as well as Henry kind of having this enemies to lovers situation with the Prince of Wales. So I just think that the whole song, I Think He Knows, kind of describes their relationship. I think I could literally sit here and say all of the lyrics from I Think He Knows, and it would remind anyone that has read this of the relationship between Alex and Henry. And I saw this song and I was like, that really reminds me of this book. So this one was purely based off of like vibes. This was one that I picked purely based off of the vibes of the song and the vibes of the book. And I think a lot of the lyrics in I Think He Knows kind of resonate with the relationship in this book. But this book is super fun, super cute. The relationship in this book is just chef's kiss excellence. And they also mention Taylor Swift in this book. So if that doesn't give you a reason to pick it up, I don't know what will. So the next song that I want to base a book off of is one that I kind of had to do because these two things are just so obviously perfect for one another to be compared to. So the song I want to talk about is Wonderland from 1989, and the book I'm going to discuss is Heartless by Marissa Meyer. So Heartless is actually an Alice in Wonderland retelling, so that by itself is enough reason to compare it to Wonderland. So that's it. No, I'm just kidding. I will talk about this book a little bit. So basically this is an Alice in Wonderland retelling, but it is following the Queen of Hearts kind of before she becomes the Queen of Hearts. So in Alice in Wonderland, we know the Queen of Hearts as kind of this kind of terrifying, off with their heads sort of woman. We don't want to mess with her. But this book is kind of her origin story and kind of following her before she becomes the Queen of Hearts, and kind of how she becomes the person we know in the book and in the movies, that we see how she becomes to that point. And when you start this book, it is very clear that she does not start off being that miserable and that scary and that mean. And it's really good, but it's also super devastating to read this book and know what she's going to end up becoming. It's just kind of this sense of dread throughout this whole book, but it's so good. And I think this is actually one of Marissa Meyer's best books in my opinion. And it's just super fun, and I had to compare it to Wonderland, which is literally talking about Alice in Wonderland. So I had to make the comparison. I just couldn't not let it go. So the next song I want to compare a book to is actually from Taylor's debut, which is A Place in This World. So I wanted to compare it to The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So our main character in this book is called Ziamara, and her family is pretty religious. Her mother is very religious, and she kind of has had all these very strict rules kind of throughout her whole life, and religion has been such a big part of her entire life. And as she gets into high school, she kind of starts to doubt whether religion is something that is like that important to her, and kind of just starts to question everything that she has grown up knowing. She also joins a poetry club, which is super interesting. This whole book is actually told in verse, and I thought that that was a super cool way to tell this story. But seeing her passion for poetry and also her struggles as a teenager, kind of trying to figure out who she is on top of the pressures from her parents and specifically her mom, is something that I think anyone could kind of relate to. Maybe not in the exact same way, but I definitely think the pressure she feels to kind of understand herself and what she wants is something that is very relatable to a lot of people. And in the song A Place in This World, Taylor's kind of talking about trying to figure out what she wants to do, what her path is, and she's not quite sure of what she's supposed to be doing. And basically just like the line, "I'm just a girl trying to find a place in this world," I feel like really resonates with Xiomara as a character. So I wanted to make that comparison and also recommend this book because it is so good. And if you have not read it, please read it. So the next song I want to compare a book to is Change, which is one of my favorite songs off of Fearless. It's always been a song that I have loved, but having Change be the surprise song that was for my concert that I went to for the Reputation tour just made Change even more special. So I knew I had to include it. And the book that I'm going to compare it to is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. So I wouldn't say this is like, an underrated, unknown, indie sort of book. We all know what The Hunger Games is. Even before I read it, I only read it for the first time this year, but we all know what The Hunger Games is. But in case you don't know what The Hunger Games is about, I'll give a quick little description in case you don't know. But basically, in this dystopian world, there are different districts, and a boy and a girl from each district will be chosen to go into the Hunger Games, which is basically a competition where literally you all die except for one, and whoever makes it out in the end wins the Hunger Games. And it's a very disturbing, twisted story, but it's really good, and I really enjoyed this trilogy. But the reason I'm kind of comparing it to Change is I feel like Change is kind of talking about a revolution and making a change. And also, like, one of the first lines is repeating history and you're getting sick of it, how the Hunger Games has been happening over and over and over again, and it's just so sad, and all these people are really struggling. Like, in Katniss's district, they're all really struggling, and I think a lot of people like Katniss are kind of sick of the Hunger Games happening. Also, I do have the lyrics up, so don't mind me reading off of them really quickly. But these walls that they put up to hold us back will fall down. This revolution, the time will come for us to finally win. Tell me that isn't Katniss and her crew and all these people kind of starting a revolution to fight back against the Capitol, to fight back against this messed up system and the Hunger Games and everything like that. I just think that this song and the message of the song really is very similar to the message within this book, so I wanted to compare those. So the next song I want to talk about is another one where it's basically just the whole song. Kind of reminds me of this book and the relationship and like the friendship that kind of develops in this book, and that is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. So this book, we're following a character named Liz who doesn't get the financial aid or the money that she needs to go to the school that she wants to. So in order to kind of get that help and get that sponsorship that she needs, she decides to run for prom queen. So I guess there's a sponsorship that the school gives out to people who win prom queen and prom king. So she decides to run in that competition, and in that competition as well, there is a girl named Mac, and just the relationship between them that kind of develops throughout this book reminds me of the messages and just the cuteness of Everything Has Changed. I think just the comparison of in Everything Has Changed, talking about these two people meeting and having their lives change, and also the comparison to Liz and Mac meeting in this competition and how their relationship changes and develops through this book, I think just very much reminds me of Everything Has Changed for some reason. Plus, I think Everything Has Changed is just such a cute song, and I feel like You Should See Me in a Crown is such a cute book that they just very much compare to one another very easily. So the next song I wanted to talk about is Invisible String, which is off of Folklore, and the whole kind of message of this song, discussing soulmates, discussing a invisible string, tying people together. I had to go with the ultimate soulmate triangle. I couldn't not mention The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. So the whole message, like I said, of Invisible String is the whole concept of soulmates and having this invisible string tying people together. So first and foremost, I think Jem and Will are Shadowhunters, and they are parabatai, and they kind of have this special bond between one another, and I honestly think that the invisible string ties them together. But there's also this character named Tessa, who is kind of the love interest for both of them. It's kind of a love triangle situation, but it is so well done, in my opinion. I'm someone that love triangles. I feel like they're just not my favorite thing. It kind of depends on how it's done, and I feel like this love triangle is done very well. I honestly think all three of them, Tessa, Jem, and Will, have this invisible soulmate string tying all of them together, and I think it was just kind of destined for them to all have very strong emotions towards one another. So I just had to say that this trilogy represented an invisible string. I couldn't not do it. So the next song I wanted to mention is Paper Rings, which is from Lover, and I wanted to compare it to Capturing the Devil by Carrie Maniscalco. So this is actually the fourth book in the Stalking Jack the Ripper series, so I would say that kind of the song kind of just represents the two main characters, Audrey Rose and Thomas Creswell, and their relationship kind of throughout the whole series, but specifically the fourth and final book. So I did want to specifically mention this book, but I won't talk about like spoilers or anything because this is the final book in the series. But honestly, I feel like Audrey Rose and Thomas Creswell's relationship throughout the entire series could be described by Paper Rings. I think just the overall message of Paper Rings being like, you just really care about this person, you just love them so much that you don't care about really anything else. You don't care about having the big things, you just want to be with them. And I definitely think that Audrey Rose and Thomas are very similar to that. And due to specific events that happen in this book, I think Paper Rings could really apply to them because they just don't care. They just want to be with each other. And so I had to mention this, and just Audrey Rose and Thomas Creswell in general, I feel like could be described as Paper Rings. At least towards the end of the series, I definitely think that they have a more angsty relationship at some point throughout the series, but I think just overall, Paper Rings, the cute fluffiness, just wanting to be together really represents these two characters. So the next song I want to mention is I Did Something Bad, which is off of Reputation, an iconic album, an iconic song, and the book I wanted to compare that song to is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. So in this book, we are following renegades who are kind of the superheroes, as well as the anarchists who are kind of the villains. And our main character, Nova, is an anarchist, and she is kind of trying to seek revenge on the renegades for some wrongdoings that she believes they've done to her and her family in the past. So she's kind of seeking out revenge, and we are also following Adrian, who is a renegade, and it's just such an interesting trilogy that comments on good versus evil and how it's not always just black and white and how those two things can kind of come together. So I specifically wanted to compare Nova, the main character, to the song I Did Something Bad because Nova is trying to seek revenge, but the thing with Nova is she does know what she's doing is not necessarily the nicest thing. Like, she knows what she's doing is bad, and kind of throughout this trilogy she is kind of struggling with what she should and shouldn't be doing, but I think for the most part she's just willing to do what she needs to do, and she just doesn't really care like who she hurts in order to get her way. Obviously some things do get challenged throughout the book, but I think overall I Did Something Bad is like Nova's theme song. And also just the line specifically, for every lie I tell them, they tell me three, I feel like could go either way because Adrian, who is one of the renegades, also has his own secrets as well, and I feel like the two of them are just constantly lying to each other, and there's just a lot of secrets, a lot of lies, a lot of secret identities. So overall I just think I Did Something Bad is very representative of this whole trilogy. So the next song I want to mention is I Know Places, and I know that this song is kind of a comparison to Taylor Swift and her relationships and just her as a person, and kind of feeling like she's being hunted by the paparazzi and just the media, but the song is kind of making a parallel to a hunter and a fox, and I just kind of wanted to more so focus on the fact of the whole concept of being hunted and being followed. So for this, I'm going to compare it to A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. So this is the second book in a series, the Ember and the Ashes series, so I won't get into too much detail about what happens in this book because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. That would be mean of me. But basically, a few characters in this book are actually trying to escape and run away and get to a certain place, and are trying not to be found because people are looking for them. They are being hunted by certain other characters. So I think just the whole concept of feeling hunted, trying to hide, and trying to escape is very similar to the whole story in I Know Places. And also just kind of how in the song Taylor Swift is kind of talking to her partner and saying like, we got this, we're together, and we're gonna run away from them. And I feel like that's very similar to the characters who are trying to run away in this book, and I just love this comparison. This actually was a comparison that was made for me because I was trying to find a way to find a Taylor Swift song to relate to this series because I love this series so much, and Darian from Darian Reads actually recommended I Know Places for this song specifically, so thank you, Darian. It was a good recommendation. So yeah, just the whole concept of being hunted and being on the run is definitely something some characters in this book can relate to, and if you haven't read An Ember in the Ashes yet, please do it. So the next song I wanted to talk about is Treacherous from Red, one of my favorite songs off of that album, and I was actually really happy with this comparison, so I wanted to compare it to basically the entire Dark Artifices trilogy, but this is Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. So again, we have another Shadowhunter book, but basically our two main characters in this book, Emma and Julian, are parapeti, so they have this special bond with one another similar to Will and Jem, like I mentioned earlier. And basically there's this rule that parapeti cannot be in a relationship, they cannot fall in love. It will cause some weird things to happen. No one really knows why that's the case, but they just know that that's against the rules and they can't actually do that. But, of course, Emma and Julian they start developing feelings for one another. So you can see how that would be a mess. But their relationship and them knowing that they're not allowed to do that and that there will be a reason as to why they can't be in love, but they're kind of having this relationship anyway, is exactly why I compared it to treacherous. Like the whole line, this slope is treacherous, this path is reckless. They know that it's a bad idea and that the path is dangerous and they shouldn't be going down it because it's not allowed, but they're doing it anyway, and they like it anyway. Treacherous definitely compares to Emma and Julian's relationship throughout the whole trilogy, how they kind of know that they're making bad decisions, how they're not supposed to be doing what they're doing, but they do it anyway, and they don't care because they love one another. So yeah, definitely would compare this to Treacherous, and kind of that comparison hurts my heart because I love the song and their relationship. It's just, it's pain. So we are now on to the 13th and final song and book. So the 13th song that I wanted to talk about is Haunted, which is from Speak Now, and the book I wanted to talk about is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So the reason I wanted to compare this to Haunted is not because of the plot of this story or this duology, but because of a couple of the relationships in this book. So specifically the relationships between Kaz and Inej, and also Matthias and Nina. I definitely think there's certain parts of the song that kind of resonate with one of the couples more than the other, kind of like You and I, Walk a Fragile Line, the whole beginning, I feel like could relate to Kaz and Inej. And then I think like the whole chorus of like, don't leave me like this, I thought I had you all figured out, could definitely relate to Matthias and Nina. I just feel like this song kind of represents all of the couples within this story, and I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil like the whole thing, what happens in this series, but definitely can relate to the characters and the relationships in this book to Haunted. It kind of hurts my feelings to make that comparison, but I did it. So yeah, those are the 13 books for 13 Taylor Swift songs. Again, I hope you maybe got some recommendations out of this, but I know I did talk about some pretty popular books. I just kind of wanted to compare books to Taylor Swift songs because that's my brand. I also apologize for losing a bit of steam towards the end of this video. I feel like my explanations and descriptions just kind of went downhill a little bit, but I hope you still enjoyed. I hope maybe you got some recommendations out of this. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any Taylor Swift songs that you associate with certain books, or any books that you can kind of compare to Taylor Swift songs in any way. I would love to hear your comparisons in the comments below. But I hope you guys enjoyed this Taylor Swift themed video in honor of her birthday. If you made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you. Second of all, leave a star emoji down below in the comments so I know you made it until the end. But other than that, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe down below if you have not already. Also, don't forget to click the little bell notification to be notified anytime I upload. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.